Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson.
Welcome to episode 114 of Sports Management Podcast. Before we start, I have checked the podcast statistics and 40% of you who listen to this do not subscribe to the podcast. So please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It will help the show grow, and the bigger the show, the bigger the guests. Thank you. Now, today's guest is Marc Riccio, the CEO of USA Lacrosse, the governing body for lacrosse in the US. Marc is only the second CEO in the body's history, taking on the position in 2021. Get ready to learn the plan to get lacrosse into the Olympics, how to grow the game of lacrosse, Marc's passion for esports, his experiences from Hofstra University, and much more. Marc Riccio, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you today. For those of you who might not know, you are the CEO of USA Lacrosse, the governing body for lacrosse in the US. So can you tell us a little bit about that role and what it is that you do?
Sure. So the governing body for the sport in the U.S., we'll start at the top, and we are in the U.S. what's called a 501c3 organization, which simply means we are a semi-public organization in the sense that we don't retain profit. So that simply means we're stewards of the game. So as we take in revenue, our job is to reinvest that revenue back into the game to support the game. And so that's the context from which we work on in terms of a business structure. And in terms of what we do, our mission is really comprised of 11 words, 3 objectives: fuel the growth, enrich the experience, field the best national teams. And that's what we do. And then how we do it, certainly there's a lot of layers to that, but that is our role for both the men's and women's game in the United States, as well as the different disciplines of lacrosse, which is field lacrosse, box lacrosse, which is an indoor version, and what's called sixes lacrosse, which is a small-sided, if you will, or a smaller version of the field game. That is the Olympic objective. As we try to get into LA 28 Olympic Games, that's the discipline that we go with, much like a rugby sevens or a cricket T20 in terms of a discipline.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And when looking into, doing some research for this, there are some topics that comes up, and one of them is the growth of the game, how to grow lacrosse. And that's something that you work really hard on. So can you talk a lot about some initiatives or some things that you're doing to drive growth to lacrosse?
Sure. Growth for any sport or any business for that matter is critical. And I want to back up in terms of, grow the game sometimes is an overused terms in every sport, but certainly in lacrosse, it seems like it's been, a rally cry for many, many years. And the organization and the sport had tremendous growth from 2000, roughly the early 2000s to, right up until COVID. And that was very organic. And that was a great opportunity for so many athletes to experience the game. But moving forward, like many organizations, particularly in youth sports, we took the COVID hit. A lot of kids just never were introduced to sport in a way they might have in the past because their local program just wasn't operating. So that emphasis on growth should also include stabilization. That is also to ensure stabilization in youth sport, particularly lacrosse. But then how do we reinvigorate that growth, which we've been able to do post-COVID? And that's really important for commercial viability, for strength of a sport, and sustainability of a sport. And so our approach has been very data-driven. We've taken the approach that you have a program, and if in 2 years those young athletes are not still playing the game, then that program, no matter how expensive or inexpensive, was really the most costly program you had because you did not retain players. So we've taken a much more data-driven approach over the last couple of years in terms of how do we measure success. And we look at cost per acquisition, cost per retention. We've taken very, customer acquisition business models and applied them to youth sports, and particularly to our programming. So is our programming, and there's different versions of the programming, to work in a community that has an infrastructure, well, your cost per acquisition should inherently be less. But if you go into a community that might have less resources or that is unfamiliar with the game, your cost per acquisition is going to be higher. And you just need to know that. It allows you to measure the impact and success or not of the type of programs that you run. But it also allows you to understand what your investment needs to be if you want to stabilize, but also achieve exponential growth. And so those programs really are designed around developing coaches, because every athlete needs a great coach, and developing business models in communities with community programs that are self-sustaining. So that program can maintain itself year over year over year. And so far, so good. We've recovered from COVID pretty well, and we're encouraged by what we see.
I'm excited to hear. And in business, you talk about, as you said, the customer acquisition cost, and that it should, as much as it costs to get a customer in, they should spend more money with you for that to have been successful. But so you talked about 2 years, but it's a bit different because they are not a customer per se, it's participation. So how do you evaluate when you have the data-driven approach, but how do you evaluate it afterwards?
Well, we do look at lifetime value, and we do approach it in the sense that they are a customer in the sense that a participant is often a member of our organization. So we're funded, how we make our money, and then what we do with that money in terms of reinvesting back into the game, we make our money through membership. We have over 400,000 members, and they are dues-paying members, and those dues, range from anywhere from $35 to $60, and there's benefits that come with it, everything from insurance and access to content and tips and drills and safety and wellness, background checks. So there's certainly a portfolio of benefits that come with it. We also generate revenue through apparel, merchandise. We're a bit of a content company in terms of social channels, video, engagement, and then philanthropy. We raise funds through philanthropic campaigns to support not only our national teams, but also youth development. And so we do look at it from a customer model to how do we engage? How do we encourage continued engagement? How do we encourage a member to become a donor? And how do we encourage both of those customer segments, if you will, to buy product, to engage with us on media? And so it's very similar to a professional sports model where your job is to not just sell tickets. Your job is to engage that fan, build that fan base, have them come to special events to buy tickets to that special event, have them buy your product. So it's a very similar model in terms of looking at lifetime value and customer acquisition. Now, at the end of the day, participation is what really matters. We can talk about revenue generation, but if you don't have kids playing the game and then have a pathway to play through their middle school, high school, and potentially even college and adult recreation, then you're not being successful. And so we do measure that in terms of how long someone stayed a member, when they entered the system, if you will, as a member, and how long they've stayed a member, and how long they keep playing. Sometimes it's hard to track membership and participation, across the U.S., which is a pretty vast place. But we've got some good mechanisms in place to do that.
And that brings us back to growth of the game, as we talked about before, growing the game. And there are different ways to grow. You can grow internationally, get more nations involved. You can grow the women's game. That's a big part in any sport right now, how to grow. When you talked about youth participation. So I assume that you work in all these different areas of the growth, I assume.
We do. So I'll take those in order. World Lacrosse is our international federation. World Lacrosse is recognized by the IOC as the sanctioned international federation, which happened over the last couple of years, which is great. We have almost 90 nations that are members of World Lacrosse. Our initiative as a sport to get into the LA 28 Olympics is really important, more so for the international growth than it is for U.S. growth. Getting into the Olympics, if we're fortunate to do so, changes the economics for most nations. If you get in the Olympics, you're Olympic sport, you're then eligible to receive government funding for your Olympic sport entity in other nations. It's not the case in the US, but it is in many other nations. That would then drive international growth even more so than it has today. And relatively speaking, we're a young sport. We're not nearly as mature, certainly as sports, like, of course, like cricket, which is hundreds of years old, and global football, aka soccer, hundreds of years old. Basketball, much older. Baseball, much older. So lacrosse is relatively young as an organized sport. It's actually the oldest sport in North America, but pretty young as an organized sport. So that would drive international growth. We certainly support that. We're active in that, but we lean on World Lacrosse as our international federation for that international banner. In terms of women's sport, it's a great opportunity for us. In fact, we're seeing more growth on the women's side and girls' side of the game than we are on the boys' side. There's actually a trend in the U.S. There's actually a little less boys' sport participation, not just lacrosse, but youth sports as a whole. And certainly, we're working with other organizations to reverse that. But the growth of women and girls' sport has been fantastic. The women's game is a little different than the men's game. They are two different games in terms of how they're played. And the women's game is equally as dynamic and exciting and athletic. And we've seen a lot of excitement and growth around women's sport in the U.S.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned that it is an old sport, though, but not organized. It's the oldest team sport in America, I read somewhere.
It is, and I'd love to share that. The origin story of lacrosse is unbelievably unique, and it is so different than any other sport that exists in the world. The sport is a Native American sport, Native American in U.S., or I should say the Americas, Native American. And the lure of the game is that the game was gifted to Native Americans by the creator. And there's an incredible spiritual lore to that. So the very first game of lacrosse, as the lore goes, was between the land animals and the air animals. And the purpose of that was designed to show that this game is for everybody, from the mouse to the deer to the eagle to the sparrow, that everybody had a role. And the game is about unity, friendship, peace. And when you're born in many Native American cultures, you're given a stick, and the stick is made of hickory and the sinew of the deer to represent both the land animals and the earth, and meaning the hickory of the tree. And you have that stick your whole life, you are buried with that stick. And so the game was played in Native American cultures and still is to train warriors, to settle disputes, but it's also called the medicine game. And medicine makes you feel better. And so when you play this game with the clear mind and the sportsmanship and the camaraderie and the joy of the game, it makes you feel better. So lacrosse is often called the medicine game. So it's the oldest team sport in North America, and it actually was in the Olympics in the early 1900s for a couple cycles. So, but as an organized sport, or the secular version of the game that you see today, is relatively new. It's only over the last 34 years that game has come to popularity.
That's an incredible story. And yes, I read that as well, that it was an Olympic sport up until 1908. And I know that that's another, topic for today, that Olympic inclusion. That's a big part that you're working on as well.
It is. So LA 28, which is the organizing committee for the 2028 Olympics, has the right, not the obligation, but the right to add local sports into the program. And you're going to see that in Paris coming up. You saw that in Japan. And the purpose behind those local sports to add to the program are pretty straightforward. Will it put more people in the seats? Will it drive more engagement? Will it attract maybe a younger, different demographic? Will it help leave a legacy in that local area? Is the game truly global? Is it gender equitable? Are the best athletes in that sport competing in the Olympics? Those are some of the criteria that LA 28 looks at. We are one of approximately, I think, 8 or 9 sports that are in the final stretch for consideration. And we could know unofficially any day. Officially, that's still a moving target when that official word will happen and the IOC will sign off on that. And if we get that nod, like I said, it would drive international investment, which would be great. But domestically, it drives visibility. And that is really important. If you see something, you are more likely to maybe be intrigued by it, to try it. So we certainly see that domestically in the U.S. as a growth opportunity. We're not putting all our eggs in that basket. We have to understand that nod from LA20 might not happen, but if it does, certainly we'd be excited and honored, and we would do everything we can to turn that into a big moment for growth and opportunity in the game.
Of course. And you will apply, I guess you say, as sixes, the style 6-on-6. So can you explain a little bit to the listeners that they might not be aware of everything about lacrosse, that there are some different types of play?
Yes. So I will start with, there are differences between the men's and women's game, and that is historical, and that has continued. So the men's game is roughly 10-on-10, meaning what a roughly is that we'll come back to sixes and box. So it's, that's a 10-on-10 version of the game. It's played on a large field comparable to a soccer field, if you will, or global football. And the goal is 6 feet by 6 feet, and it's 10-on-10, and the object is to get the ball to the goal. And it's a big space. And there's a lot of movement similar to soccer, if you will. The principles of the game are very much like basketball, meaning that it's about matchups, it's about pick and roll, it's about 2-on-3 and 1-on-1 and fast breaks, and a lot of principles of basketball, but it's on a much bigger space comparable to soccer, if you will. The women's game is generally 11-on-11, and the men have equipment, the women do not. The women wear goggles. And there are some subtleties and rules to that, in the sense that the women's game is much more, not that the men's game is not, but the women's game is much more about finesse, about crisp passing, about set pieces. They are both exciting games. They're both just have a little bit of differences in terms of history and how they came to be. The version of sixes is, instead of 10-on-10 or 11-v-11, it's just 6-on-6. It's much more intuitive. It's also a smaller field. There's a shot clock. There's also a shot clock in the field game, but the shot clock in the sixes version is much faster, and the game is much more back and forth. In the field game, there's a face-off after every goal. Field games can be anywhere from single-digit scoring to double-digit, 10, 12, up to 20. The sixes game is a higher scoring game, into the teens, into the 20s, so much more back and forth. The time of game is much smaller. So what that means is you have a game that fits on a television screen or mobile screen much better, because you can see everybody in the field to play, and it fits a television window of an hour to an hour and a half, which is, the field game is longer. That's a television window of 2+ hours. And so that makes the game much more appealing from a cost structure, from a TV viewing standpoint, from a fan perspective. And it's a very high-paced game. And so that puts it in the best position from an Olympic standpoint. The other issue of 6-on-6 is you need less elite athletes to compete at the elite level, which drives more equality, if you will, in terms of that elite level of play. You're more likely to have teams that can compete against each other because you just need less elite athletes.
Yeah, and not only equality, but also quality, I guess, because you're shortening the roster.
Yes, well said. And that's indicated with the World Games, which is an international quadrennial competition, was held in Birmingham, Alabama last year, and sixes for the first time was featured in that international environment. And it was fantastic. It was incredibly well attended. I think it was the most well attended event at the World Games. On the men's side, Canada won gold, we won silver, and Japan won the bronze, which was a surprise. Japan's a great lacrosse nation, which most people don't realize. They're actually very, very good. And on the women's side, Canada won gold as well. We won silver, and I believe it was the Haudenosaunee, which is the Native American Haudenosaunee Confederacy, won bronze. You have to fact check me on that one, but it was a great showing of the game on the international stage and did very well.
I would like to talk also about the partnerships, because you mentioned that one way to grow the game is Olympics, is a lot of eyes on the sport, and you have one partnership with ESPN, right?
Yeah, the partnership we have with ESPN is actually funneled through World Lacrosse as the international federation. They own, if you will, the World Championship events. And so the last two World Championships at the senior level, so that was the men this past year in San Diego, where we won gold. The previous year in Towson, Maryland, where we also won gold, that was the women's. And the men's under 20, which was in Limerick, Ireland, I have to shameless plug, we won gold in that as well. All through ESPN, all broadcast through ESPN through World Lacrosse. But ESPN has taken a leadership position in the sport of lacrosse across the U.S., which has been really beneficial to us. So they feature the men's national team and all other international teams through these World Lacrosse international championships. But ESPN also owns the rights for the Premier League Lacrosse, or PLL, which is the men's professional outdoor league here in the States. And they have the rights, along with TSN up in Canada, for the NLL, which is the National Lacrosse League, which is the indoor version of the game. It's much like hockey, if you will, in a hockey rink. And ESPN owns most of the collegiate rights. And collegiate sport in the U.S., as many listeners know, is pretty big. And lacrosse is a big collegiate sport, both on the men's and women's side. And Athletes Unlimited, which is the women's pro league, ESPN has those rights as well. So they've taken a leadership position across the game in lacrosse, and we're fortunate to be able to concentrate our audience on one platform.
Yeah, that's awesome. And of course, they are a huge sports network. So that's really important for the growth of the game, as we talked about before.
It is having a place consistently where you can consume the sport, see the sport, but also see different versions of it. The men's game, the women's game, the outdoor game, as well as the box indoor game, obviously super valuable to us.
Yeah. We have talked a lot about the sports of lacrosse, but I would like to know your story and how you got into the sport of lacrosse. So take us back to the very beginning. How did you get into the sport? And then we work ourselves up to where we are now.
Sure. I will start with our mission. Our mission around fueling the growth, enriching the experience, and fielding the best national team, certainly what we do. But the why we do it is because lacrosse changes lives. And I've been around a lot of sports through my time, and I'll get into my history here, but I've never been around a sport where more people say that sport changed my life than lacrosse. And I think it has to do particularly with the fact that it's a unique origin story and the spiritual history and roots of the game in terms of the medicine game. I believe there is impact that is had by that. And I, like many other, had my life profoundly changed because of the game. So I grew up in Western New York, small town in the Finger Lakes region of New York State. And a new neighbor moved in and had a lacrosse stick and a goal. They dropped in the yard and had an extra one. And I picked it up and started playing. And that was, around the age of 10, 11. And I was 12 years old and I started playing my first organized lacrosse. And like most who love this game, you pick it up, you start playing around with a stick and the ball because it all starts with a stick. And I just never looked back. And so I came from a home that we didn't have a lot of money, quite frankly. And lacrosse was a vehicle for me to go to college. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship and I went to Hofstra University, which is on Long Island, which is another big home base, if you will, for the game. And I played throughout college. And because I went down there and I turned that into going to graduate school and then actually going to get graduate assistantship and getting a job at the university. And that began my career working in fundraising and marketing in athletics. And on the campus of Hofstra, the New York Jets, the NFL team, practiced. That was their home base. Got to know people at the Jets after working several years at Hofstra. I ended up getting a job at the Jets. I spent 17 years working at the New York Jets, all on the business side. And from there, I spent a little time in startup land after I left the Jets, working on a few projects in consulting, which was incredible learning experience, and parlayed that into working for a small event company that I had actually hired and worked with at the Jets. And right after I started with that company, we were approached to be purchased by, at the time, what was Lagardère Sports and Entertainment, which is a global agency. We decided to sell to Lagardère. And I spent almost 5 years working both domestically and globally with Lagardère, and now Sport 5. And that was a great experience because that was my first exposure to the global world. And I quite enjoyed that global mandate that I had. And then I left that organization, was working in a small law firm and consultancy for about a year, and I saw this job open up. And because I played the game, but particularly because I had a lot of the skills that this job was asking for, fundraising, commercial experience, but also high performance experience, working in a high performance athletic environment, which particularly I'd done at the Jets because we oversee our national team programs and at facilities, fan engagement, all the things that I've talked about in terms of what and how we do what we do were part of what was necessary for this job. And I believe so strongly that youth sports has such an unbelievable impact on communities, on individuals, and that is core to our mission, combined with that high performance competitive aspect, and then add in all the commercial opportunities. And that's how I ended up here. I threw my hat in the ring and survive and advance the interview process. And here I sit, and 2 years into it, I'm loving it.
That's awesome. And in August 2021, you took this job, and I found a quote from one of the board of directors, Beth Lyman. And he said, when they were looking to recruit this position, he said, "We set out to identify a leader who was an innovator and a connector, a critical thinker and a strategist, someone with integrity and deep passion for the mission of USA Lacrosse. We found this leader in Marc." So is that something that you feel like you represent?
Well, that's super flattering. I do, though. I really do. And I say that with humility. And I say that with recognizing nobody achieves success by themselves. And I didn't get here to sit in this role by myself. I was very fortunate to work with a lot of awesome, fun people, incredibly talented at my time, particularly at the Jets, but certainly Lagardère and other places. And I sit here today as a bit of a change agent in the sense that how do we evolve our organization into what's next, given, trends in youth sports, trends in commercialism, trends in viewing habits. And I can only do that through great board relationship and support. I answer to a board as a 501c3. That's how we're structured. But we've got great people on our organization who are subject matter experts who also care deeply. But I also want to recognize the work that was done by Steve Stederson, my predecessor, who was in the role for 25 plus years, was phenomenal. I mean, he took the organization literally from nothing to 400,000 strong, financially strong as well, an incredible infrastructure of 90 full-time staff across the U.S. working to grow the game. So I was very fortunate that I came into a great spot because of the work in front of me. And I get to dream big because of the work that was done before me. And so my job is to dream big, carry it forward, and then hand it off to someone else who's going to dream even bigger. And so it's been a pretty exciting process.
It sounds like it. And on that point, you said that Steve was from 1998 when it was founded up until 2021. So that's a long time. And, the world changed, things happen. Okay, COVID, everything, growing the game. So as you said, like you wanted to put your angle on it and make change. And is that something that intrigues you to see like where you can take this?
It does. What I learned at my time at the Jets is that we went from a bottom quartile revenue team to a top quartile revenue team. We built a stadium. We tried building a stadium on the west side of Manhattan. It didn't work, but even that was a learning experience and change. We built a training facility. We fundamentally changed the business of that organization in very material and profound ways. And what I learned is that I enjoyed that a great deal. I enjoyed being a change agent as opposed to walking into an organization that was already running and operating, and you're keeping that thing going. There's nothing wrong with that, but that does not excite me as much as change. And I certainly, that's been a mandate. It's how do we evolve and change? Even the concept of, I talked earlier on using data to track the effectiveness of our programs. In a mission-based organization, that is uncomfortable for some people because some people look at it and say, wait, we're all about the mission. We're all about growth, opportunity. And that is true. But without revenue, without understanding the impact of those programs, you really don't know if you're having the long-term impact that you think you might. And some of our programs are, but candidly, some of them are not as effective as they set out to be. And that's not wrong or bad. You just need to know that. And you need to be able to change that. And that makes people uncomfortable. And for the most part, everybody has truly embraced change and evolution. And COVID, quite frankly, gives us latitude to do so, because COVID accelerated what was already happening in every marketplace, not just lacrosse and youth sports, but every marketplace. And the market always wins. And so we've certainly had to take a hard look at some of the things that we do, and we've had to make some changes that have been uncomfortable for people. But for me, it's exciting because I can look at our organization and say, this year we will generate more revenue than we've ever generated outside of a championship year where we've hosted a championship. When you host a championship, the revenue opportunities just fundamentally change because you have 30 nations coming into your country to execute and play in a championship. So that's different. So it's the most revenue we've ever generated. We have rebounded from COVID to increase our membership over the last 2 years as well. We've increased participation according to our numbers from last year to this year. So we're trending back in the right direction. So I'm going to say we're seeing positive signs, but change is hard. There's no doubt about it. It's hard.
Of course. I'm glad to hear you're doing so well. And I was thinking about it now with COVID, you need to evolve. One sport or type of sports that was very common during COVID was esports, because that's something you can do from the comfort of your own home. And I know that you have done some work with that and consulted with some things with regards to esports. So is that something, maybe you have already, but that you can implement with lacrosse and esports?
I'm bullish on video gaming and esports. And I know that certainly they've had their challenges over the last couple of years now that people are not sitting in their homes confined by COVID. So there's certainly some challenges to that. But, if you think back when we were going through the esports boom and the competitive gaming boom and video gaming, was the topic everybody talked about. Everybody who was in the business knew at that moment, we're still figuring this out. And that has come to be reality, still figuring it out. And I think that esports as a competitive gaming element is just one component to what these organizations need to do as being media companies. And so that's my point. That's what I learned working in esports, is that esports alone is not enough to generate a viable long-term business. It's just not. Just like competing with a national team for USA Lacrosse alone is not enough to develop a long-term viable business. It's an important component. What esports did well, or what the good organizations did well, is they were media companies, and they were about fan engagement, and they were about building community. And that, at its core, how you develop scale and how you develop long-term sustainability. So at USA Lacrosse, I've invoked those same learnings, and how do we build community? Now, one of our great strengths is we do have a very strong community, but how do you continue to make sure it's inclusive, it's welcoming, and that you can scale that community, but also how you can monetize that engagement. And that's the secret sauce in esports and video gaming that they're still figuring out. But I certainly try to invoke those learnings and those strategies at USA Lacrosse.
But for example, with EA Sports, you have FIFA, you have NHL, you have the different sports in a video game or a computer game. Is that something that exists already, or is something that could be something to elevate the popularity of the sport?
It absolutely could. Historically, there was a game EA Sports did in lacrosse. It's probably about 10 years old now. Certainly the technology has vastly changed during that time frame. It was almost that 64-bit, type of gaming. I do think there's an opportunity for that. It would require the entire lacrosse community to get around it a bit. I think the greatest opportunity for a lacrosse game of that nature is in the same vein as EA Sports trying to do the college game day football game. The American football game that EA Sports created several years ago was so many people consider the best football game they've ever created. They're trying to recreate it, but in the age of name, image, likeness, that's becoming increasingly challenged. I think lacrosse, if they could figure that out, lacrosse would benefit from that precedent, because I think college lacrosse in the U.S. has a significant amount of rivalries that go to it and allegiances. And that, to me, was where you can get scale, and then you can layer in the pro, you can layer in the national teams, both, on the men and women's side. I would love to see that happen, but I think, as we all know, developing a video game is years and a lot of money, and you got to ensure that you've got the marketplace to support it. I think there will be a time and place. I think we're a few years off from that, though.
I see. I hope it happens. It would be interesting to see. Another topic, we talked about Hofstra University, where you went, but you went to Stanford University grad school. You have gone to St. John's University School of Law. So you have a large educational background as well, not only your professional experience. So is that something that you have valued, to get a thorough education?
Yeah, let me clarify that. So I went to I got my MBA at Hofstra, St. John's School of Law. I have my Juris Doctorum law degree, and I'm a member of the New York State Bar. The graduate program at Stanford was a management program, a certificate program that I did with the NFL. And that was a very focused NFL-driven program designed around cultivating talent at the league. And it was a tremendous program, by the way. It was awesome. With that said, yes, I value education a great deal. You can tell by that background. And I did those programs at night. I worked full time while I did those programs. And I think that was important because when you go to school at night, whether that's law school or graduate school of some kind, you're working during the day, you're going to school at night. It's a different dynamic because you're working with other professionals who are frankly doing the same thing. And so what you talk about, your experience level, what you're looking to get out of the education differs. When you go to law school, at least in the US, generally, if you go full-time during the day, you're looking to go be a lawyer as a professional. But if you're going at night, you generally already are a professional, and you're looking for the law degree to augment and complement your current career track, which is what I did, which is also what most of my classmates did. They were not going to be a lawyer per se. They were going to complement their current career. And so that changes your perspective, in that I went to law school looking to say, I want to be a better sports and entertainment executive. How can I use the legal degree, but also the learnings of how to analyze problems, assess risk, assess opportunity, which is what a law school is in so many ways. How can I use that to complement my career? The biggest thing I learned is that the cost benefit evaluation that legal principle is relied on. So much of legal principle is around what are the rights and benefits of one, what are the rights and benefits of the many, and how do we balance those? And so I looked at so many problems around cost benefit analysis, and that has really just helped me tremendously. But I certainly place great value on education, but I place great value on education in the context of application to business. Great education alone does not make you a great thinker, does not make you a great problem solver. You can do great in the classroom, but don't have enough common sense to cross the street. Well, that doesn't do anybody any good. So there's definitely a balance to be struck there.
Of course. And I mean, you are doing that balance, right? Because you were also an adjunct professor at Hofstra. So then you have the working experience and the educational, and then you mix that. So you have someone with real life experience, so to speak, to teach the university students.
Yeah. I think that it was one of the most enjoyable times in terms of teaching. You recognize a couple things. You sit in a classroom, and one, you can't BS. Right? You got to be on your game. You need to have a command of the subject matter. So it did require you as a professor. You don't get up there and just pontificate. You've got to apply what principle you're trying to convey into real world terms. And that takes some work. It takes some preparation. And so I truly enjoyed that. And so it forced me to even learn and be on my A game as I was teaching. The other thing you'll learn is when you get in front of a classroom of students, like, you got to figure out how to engage them. You can't just talk. They will zone out. They'll be looking at their phone, thinking that you don't see them looking at your phone, but you know they're looking at their phone. So you really have to learn how to engage people. And my public speaking skills, my engagement skills, my questioning skills. I'm a manager and a leader who asks a lot of questions, but I learned that through teaching because it was a way to engage the students. It was a way to get them to talking and feel comfortable and safe about asking questions themselves. So I took away probably more from teaching than maybe I gave. I don't know. Maybe that's the mark of a good symbiotic partnership. And that was certainly the case when I was teaching.
Interesting. So when you wanted to teach, did you reach out or did they reach out to you? My question is because you went to this university. So did you feel like you wanted to give back to Hofstra?
They actually reached out to me, which I was very grateful and flattered. And at first I was like, oh, oof, how do I do this? Yeah, it sounds easy. I was like, yeah, you just go back and you get them from the class and you talk. But when you look at what you really are charged with doing, you want these students to walk out of there with just to be in a better place than when they walked in. And that doesn't come from just, telling a few stories and talking. You really got to think through what you're trying to convey, what you want people to walk away with. So Hofstra did reach out to me and I was very grateful. And I appreciated my experiences teaching. It got to a point where I was committing too much time. I'm like, okay, I got to pull back the reins a little bit between my own kids and spending time with them and the work it demands. But I certainly enjoyed my time when I was there.
I see. My last fun fact, I told you before we jumped on when we press record here that I work with ice hockey. And I read that you shared a room with John Cooper, the Tampa Bay Lightning's head coach, back-to-back Stanley Cup championships. Is that true?
That is very true. Coop. He's Coop. Yeah, Coop's a good friend. So Coop, he and I were freshmen together. So we came into Hofstra together and we were teammates and we lived together for 2 out of those. I was there for 5 years. He was there also for 5 years. He played hockey. He did play club hockey his 5th year as he finished up his degree. So, we were suite mates with 2 other friends of ours for a couple of years. And yes, good dude. He was from British Columbia, West Coast of Canada. I was from upstate New York. And at the time, Hofstra was many more people were from Long Island than non-Long Island. So he and another good friend of ours, Kenny Curry, was from Syracuse. And, so we were like the 3 or 4 of us that were not from Long Island. So we bonded, good friends, a lot of good stories. And yes, we are college friends and teammates.
That's awesome. Many sports professional coming out of Hofstra.
It's interesting. We, for a school that's got Dutch heritage, that's the Hofstra name. That's where it comes from. It was actually created by 2 individuals who came in and created that Dutch lineage. There's tulips all over the place. There's lots of remembrances of places not Long Island around Hofstra. But it certainly produced a lot of great athletes, a lot of great students. I truly enjoyed my time there, and it was very different. It's a much more urban environment, very different than where I grew up. And I that's what I was looking for and appreciated that.
I always ask because there's a lot of young people listening that they want to maybe get into the sports industry. Maybe they are early on in their careers. So what would be your best advice for someone who wants to work in the sports industry?
My advice, there's 3 things that I would ask people to consider in no particular order. The first one is become an expert in something. And an expert is all relative to your age and your experience, but have a superpower. And what I mean by that is do something that differentiates you or separates you, that you can communicate to a prospective employee and how that skill is valuable to that prospective employee. And that skill could be problem solving. It could be salesmanship, could be social media, could be a second language that you speak, but something that differentiates you, that makes you a bit of an expert, if you will, that has value to an organization. The second is ask a lot of questions. It's okay to ask questions. Become a student of the industry, become a student of leadership, become a student of areas that interest you. And it's okay to ask questions. I ask a lot of questions, and questions you can learn a lot. It helps you develop relationships with people in ways you didn't anticipate. And that can be incredibly valuable. So I encourage a lot of question asking, thoughtful question asking. Don't ask questions you can otherwise find the answer to yourself. Ask thoughtful questions. And the last is bring the energy, smile, have some energy. Energy is contagious. People want to be around that. And I know it's a bit of Ted Lasso, but that's true. Like if you're a dud, and I'm not saying you have to be something that you're not, right? Not everybody's gregarious. Not everybody's a type A personality, but you can smile. You can laugh. You can have a bit of energy without having to be over the top. That's not what you're looking for. but that energy is contagious and people want to be around that and work with people like that. And so take that into consideration when you're meeting new people and when you're interviewing.
That's awesome advice. I also know that you're a fan of quotes. So do you have anyone in particular that you want to share with us?
Oh, wow. I have a lot. I will give you this one, which one I turn to a lot. It's from Tolstoy. Patience and time are the greatest warriors. And that's a bit of a paraphrase of the quote, by the way. I don't think that's the exact quote as he wrote, but that's the paraphrase. And I share that because we all feel this sense of urgency and everything needs to happen with some immediacy. And that you get the email that comes in or the text message and you got to respond, or there's a problem and you feel like you've got to solve it. The reality is most deadlines are human made. And most of the time, not all, but most, patience and time will bring you the answer and are the greatest warriors and outlast all of us. So it's okay to take a breath, stop, think, figure it out.
Is there something I haven't asked you yet that you want to mention? Could be about yourself or lacrosse.
Well, yes. One last thing. I encourage people, if you don't know the game, seek out USA Lacrosse, go online, check it out. It's interesting. It's fun. There's a bit of athleticism. There's a lot of strategy. And it's just the origin story and the history of the game are important. And that's the second thing. I encourage those who either don't know the game or do know the game, learn it, know it. It matters a great deal. And I think you will be better off for it by taking the time to understand that and learn that. And the game is a lot of fun. I encourage you to pick up a stick and try it.
I hope they do. Before I let you go, the last question that I ask everyone is, who from your network would you think would be a good guest for this podcast?
There are some interesting lacrosse coaches that have unique history in the game. Our most recent men's national team coach, John Danowski, super interesting. I would also say Athletes Unlimited, CEO John Patrikoff, and their head of lacrosse, this woman, Abby Jackson. Super interesting as you build a multi-sport women's pro league, because they run pro leagues in both lacrosse, volleyball, softball, and basketball, and that's a super interesting model. And I think those individuals would have unique perspectives on not only the game, but the sport as a whole, both on the men's side and the women's side.
Yeah, that's really good names. Marc, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you very much. Thoughtful questions. Truly enjoy the opportunity, and grateful for a chance to share our story and share the game.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportmpodcast.